Thank you so much for being here today. You may be seated. We're going to jump on into what I hope is going to be an exciting month of November. I'm excited about this month. This is going to be a good one. We are in. Let me just tell you a little bit. The next couple of weeks, I'll explain momentarily. But let me fast forward before I get into the next couple of weeks. In 2 weeks from today, that would be, I hear noises playing here. Who's singing to me? Okay. There used to be an old rule in church that if your cell phone went off during the service, that you owed the pastor a pizza. That's not a policy we hold, but I would love to reinstate that someday because I love myself some Aurelios. So just feel free to, have a reason to buy me one. That'd be great. So, anyhow, I don't want leftover. I want my own Aurelios pizza. Come on now. Well, okay. So anyhow, the next couple of weeks, 2 weeks from today, we're going to have a service the Sunday before Thanksgiving that will be very unique for our church. I don't think, Anthony's in the back room and Nathan was here earlier. We've never done anything like we're going to do that day during a service at Lighthouse. So the Sunday before Thanksgiving will be unique, very unique for us. And I can't wait for it because it'll be, I hope, good. We'll find out. It's going to be fun. Then the week after Thanksgiving, the following week, also something that we've done only one time similar years ago and not really exactly like what we're going to do that day. So we have some very unusual Sundays coming up at the end of this month that I am very excited about and you don't want to miss, whether you're in with us live or online. We want you to enjoy those at the end of November. But for today and for next Sunday, I want to talk to you about something that we are doing that we're going to spend much at the end of the service, we're going to talk about more. But we're going to talk for the next couple of weeks about something that we are calling Be Rich. Be Rich. And I believe that's the graphic that's coming on the screen at some point. There it is. Okay, good. Be Rich. And we are excited about this idea, and I'm going to explain where it comes from. It actually comes from the Bible. Originally, and then other places as well. But Be Rich is something we're going to discuss the next 2 weeks, and we're going to share some ideas and some truth with you for the next few minutes. But at the end of the service today, after we have our quiet time and some prayer, and then the worship team is going to sing for us, I'm going to come back up here like I usually do, but we're not doing question and answer or something like that. We're going to take a time to explain what Be Rich 2020 looks like for Lighthouse Church. So if you're watching online or with us, you don't want to miss the end. Stay with us till the end today because it's going to be exciting to talk about. But the idea of Be Rich comes from a Bible verse written in the book of 1 Timothy 6 and verse 17. I'm going to read those to you. We'll come back to them later. 1 Timothy 6:17 says, "Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment." The next verse, verse 18, says, "Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich," and those are words, "they should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others." And so that's the phrase, be rich, in the book of Timothy. We'll explain more about that momentarily. But we're taking those words and we want to encourage us this year and beyond to be rich. And so my goal for today and for next week, I'll just lay out the cards on the table. What I hope to do a little bit today is to help us to be grateful to be rich. To be grateful to be rich. And then what I hope to come back to later is that I want us to encourage us to be great at being rich. That is my agenda. So now you can take a nap in the next couple of weeks. But no, this is important. And I hope that you'll hang with us as we talk about these things. Now I know that as we say these words, some of us are sitting here saying, hello, Arlen. Cool story, bro, but I'm not rich. Like you had that financial series a couple of weeks ago. Like I need all of that. There's no danger. That's not me. I understand that tension for all of us because rich is the other guy, right? Rich is that other person. Rich is the person who has a little bit more than we have. It's never us. It just never is. because we're always having somebody else nearby who has more than we do to prove that we're not rich. But I want you to think about some things. Did any of you this morning stand in front of a closet full of clothes trying to pick one? Just if I can find something to wear in this whole thing. I mean, I can't find it's the funniest word you'll ever hear. There's nothing to wear. Looking at the rows of clothes. There's nothing. Right? Have you ever traded in a perfectly good running car for another car? Have you ever talked on your cell phone while standing in line to get another newer version of the same phone? Have you ever gone shopping just to relax? Like not to I gotta have, something, or there's nothing to eat at supper. So you've gone shopping just to relax. I have not done that, by the way, just for the record. I've never considered shopping and relaxing as similar terms, but some of you have. Here's the thing, it's all subjective at some point. And I wanted to do my best to convince you that you are, in fact, a have rather than a have not. So here's the thing. Be rich is not our idea. First of all, it was something that Paul said to Timothy 2,000 years ago that we just read. But that phrase, taking that phrase and what we're going to do with it is not original to us. Many churches across America, now across our world, are taking this idea of being rich, and it's a spreading idea that we've been aware of as a church leadership for a few years, and we've been impressed with and in awe of what good it's doing. And we decided that we wanted to also be a part of being a church that focuses on this idea of being rich because it's a great idea. But it's been around for a while. In fact, I think the first place it started was North Point Ministries in Alpharetta, Georgia. And they kind of spearheaded it many, many years ago, and others have taken the mantle and run. And you can go lots of places, and they're doing Be Rich. It's not new to us, not original to us. But we've been watching it, and so last year, if you were with us in December, we talked to the church about what we wanted to do for some kind of missions opportunity, and we were able to do that in December. But what we want to do this year is finally kind of step out ourselves and say, let's do our own version of Be Rich that others are doing elsewhere and been doing very well. And it's exciting. And some of these are bigger churches that have a much bigger reach. They can do much more good than we can because of their size. But as we continue to grow, and as we continue to get inspired, I believe that we can see our opportunities magnify in what it means for us to be rich. And so we're going to talk about Be Rich 2020 for our church at the end of our time. And you don't want to miss that, so hang with us. But what we're going to do for now is we're going to share this idea. Now, because it's been around for a while, actually, Pastor Andy Stanley wrote a book about this topic called How to Be Rich, explaining what they do as a church recently. I actually got a copy of that and read it through 3 times because it was so awesome. And we decided as a church that today and next week, I don't want to try to say anything better than that to you. So honestly, a lot of what we're going to unpack and I'm going to say today and next week is going to be content that's it's not original with us. I'm going to share it with you so that we can think in these terms this first year of hopefully many more years of taking this time of year to be rich. So I'm just going to kind of pass along basically some things that have inspired me from other people and hopefully help you. Now, I'm going to begin by telling you a story that will probably at first seem like, what does this have to do with anything we're talking about? It's going to be like, I'm going to take a big turn, and if you're thinking it, you're going to be like, what's he talking about? But hopefully when I'm done with a story, you'll see why we're talking this way, and it'll make sense to you. In fact, I'm actually going to do myself a favor. I'm going to read a lot of this, which I don't normally do, because I wrote it down in a way where I can just give it to you. So bear with me as I tell you a story, and I come back to our theme today afterwards. It's a story about someone who was sick a long time ago, and we're going to call them, they were called at the time, they were known as Miss A. Miss A. Miss A was a woman who, when she went to the doctors in her day, they saw her as visibly stricken. Her motor skills were reduced to semi-controlled trembles, like someone who was near the end of life. Doctors may have thought she had tuberculosis or perhaps a blood disease. She was described as looking like a discarded cadaver. Her cheeks were sunken, but she had her skin was like a cheesecloth draped over a skeleton. She was, by all imaginations, a lost cause. Her pulse was at 46 beats per minute. Her respiration was weak. But strangely, She had a nervous energy that suggested high hormone levels. Her organ function, urine, and appetite all appeared to be normal. So something was wrong, yet she was clearly dying. Now, this is 1866, and there was no modern medicine like we have today. There was no CAT scans. There were no MRIs. In fact, sometimes the treatments people used in those days to treat sick people were just very bad ideas. Things like bloodletting and all sorts of things through history have been done trying to help somebody get better and actually hurt them worse. In fact, if the leading cause of death was disease, the second leading cause could have been treatments for disease, because they were so barbaric in some places, trying to figure out what concoctions might make someone better, especially when they could not tell what was wrong. And so Miss A was sick, and they had no hope, and they had no answers. But a man came into the picture named Sir William Gall. Sir William Gall was the kind of doctor who was different than many doctors were at the time. He was slow to provide treatment, and he was quick to care. He was slow to rush in and just throw the next concoction and hope it worked. He would listen, he would wait, he would treat symptoms and watch and see for patterns. He was observant, he was inquiring, and he cared for people, not just their problems. In time, Sir William Gall diagnosed Miss A's ailment. It was a new ailment. He diagnosed it. He nursed her back to health against all odds. And afterwards, he named her ailment. The name was given anorexia nervosa. He would go on to treat many other people just like her, Miss B, Miss C, and so on, for years to come. Anorexia, perhaps you know much about it. It's the first psychological disease spawned by modern industrialized culture, and it has become one of its most enduring. And this is a big deal because throughout the 1800s, civilizations were shifting. Throughout that time of history, cities were growing bigger. People were moving away from their agrarian lifestyle to be living closer to people where industry was popping. And because of that, you saw cultures being consolidated. People were sharing big buildings. People were reading the same newspapers. Social norms began to be established in these cities, and on a scale never seen before. Lifestyle magazines would blanket communities, and people would begin to read unwritten codes of conduct and rules for conformity to fit in to these urban centers. And for the first time in history, it became possible to take an idea and promote it on a massive, massive scale to massive numbers of people like never before. And so basically the age of the mega peddler had officially begun. And because of industrialization, everything was bigger too. Cities were bigger, basic goods turned into enormous industries, news sources turned into mass media, factories churned out products, and the age of needs-based marketing kind of fell aside, and people began to have to market all the goods that were being manufactured to people and convince them that they needed these products to create a massive level of demand. And one concept that they began to push in this time of history, they began to promote the ideal body size. So corsets became all the rage. They became in style, and fashion became imperative. The importance of an hourglass figure was emphasized for women everywhere. And here's the thing, whenever something gets blown out of proportion, it always has ripple effects. Other things also end up getting blown out of proportion with it, right? You see, before this industrialized time, in the early 1800s and before, the ideal body of the early 1800s was plump and shapely. Like that was the ideal. That means you were doing okay. Plump and shapely, that's ideal. But now, things were different. The corset took things in a whole new direction. To accentuate the full-figured look everyone wanted, the lace-up corset was designed to shrink the waist, giving the appearance of fullness everywhere else. It was honestly mostly an optical illusion at first. However, The custom evolved into a trend that brought real ramifications. To keep up, women began to draw their corsets even tighter and tighter so they can keep up with each other. Over time, a woman could push things around and train her midsection to achieve enormous reductions in her waist. At its peak, the standard for a quote-unquote attractive waist was under 20 inches. And 16 to 18 inches were often achieved through months of training and tightening and maneuvering and shifting around. What happened because of this is that women couldn't breathe deeply, and so there was a lot of shallow breathing going on because they couldn't get the oxygen into the deep part of their lungs. And with shallow breathing, mucus began to form in the lower lungs, and they had persistent coughs just all the time that couldn't be stopped. So, health ramifications began to be debated. It's interesting, kind of like gun control or the deficit is debated today politically. People were debating the health ramifications of corsets. It was called, by the way, it had a name. It was called the corset controversy. And people were opinionated about it. In fact, and the funny part was a lot of women were defending it. I was reading some comments and editorials that were held around of people saying things like, I wouldn't even think of going in public uncivilized and without my, corsets on. I mean, it was just like expected culturally to go out and look a certain way. But despite the many vocal critics, there were many supporters and defenders. And this is at this time of history that Miss A began to struggle. It was during this time of life that she was young enough and yet old enough to begin to develop her own worldview, discovering the meaning of life and learning how to fit in. And under the weight of this tremendous social pressure, she considered the implications of being fashionable or being comfortable. Do I be fashionable or do I be comfortable? Now, there's a common myth I want to dispel. A common myth about anorexics. The common myth is that when an anorexic person, when they look in the mirror, that they see a fat person. And that's not accurate, that's not true. What they see when they look in the mirror is someone who would be better off just a little bit thinner. That's what they see, someone who they think would be better off if they were just a little thinner than they are right now. So that for Miss A, what that meant was tightening up her corset another inch or two. Until she went to the mirror again and was reminded once again by looking at herself in the mirror, nope, still not thin enough. Let's tighten that baby up some more and achieve the next goal and the next goal and the next goal is eat less, let's starve ourselves until we're unhealthy. A thin waist, here's the problem with it. A thin waist is an abstract ideal that's difficult to define and impossible to own outright. At some point, it becomes an irrational, immeasurable, unattainable pursuit. Now, you say, well, of course. But here's the thing. There's something about living in a civilized, industrialized culture that causes us to compromise rational thought. It just does that. I mean, people who lived in agrarian cultures, they didn't live this kind of life. They just went out and tried to figure out how to grow crops and survive. They weren't bombarded with these social pressures. To them, life was about, can I survive? Where will the next meal come from? But as people began to move to cities and began to compare themselves with each other, as people began to peddle what ideal is supposed to look like, the richer we got and the richer we get, the more our priorities begin to separate from our actual needs. When all of our basic requirements are met, our appetites for progress don't turn off. We simply turn from the things we need to the things we want. And we begin to enter the world of the subjective. Wants are always harder to define, and they're easier to confuse. Did you know that in America today, there are well more than 8 million cases of anorexia in America? It's no secret that our culture's emphasis on body image has played a big part in that, right? Body image plays a huge role. We want to keep up. We want to look good. We want to feel good about ourselves. We live in a culture that encourages us to be thin, and so here's the crazy part. At a time in history when there is the world has the largest abundance today of food supply. The largest abundance of food supply in the history of the world. more people than ever are voluntarily starving themselves to death. The human mind's a powerful, fragile thing. Here's the irony. The irony for anorexics is that they have already mastered the very thing they're working hard to achieve. In other words, they are really good at losing weight. They're just really bad at knowing when to stop. What happens is the destination ends up taking a back seat to the journey, and don't miss this. They're so absorbed in the effort to get thin, they no longer recognize when they are thin. Now you say, well, that's cute, that's nice, Arlen. Good story. Again, what does that have to do with what we thought we were talking about today? I think the reason I wanted us to hear that story was because anorexics are not the only people who are struggling and drifting in a world of the subjective. Civilized, industrialized culture invites all of us into this crazy, bizarre world that compromises rational thought in other ways. Not only does the world encourage us to be thin, it encourages us to be rich. And the richer we become, the more our priorities seem to separate from what are our true needs. Our basic requirements have long since been met. Our basic requirements are well met already. And yet our appetites for progress have not even begun to turn off. And so what we do, all of us, is we look in the mirror. We look in the mirror and we see altered versions of what's real. We're so absorbed in our efforts to be rich, to get rich, that we no longer recognize when we are rich. And that's what happens in the world today. But the truth is we are already rich. It's all about who you're comparing to. We live in the richest time and the richest nation in history. If you are here today and you drove your car to get here and you walked into this building, or if you're watching online with technology and you're put on your television screen or on your iPhone or on your computer device, if you can get some of the books we've been recommending here lately over the last couple of weeks and you can order them, buy them, and read them, you are ahead of much of the world and rich by global standards. In the West, here's the interesting thing. In the Western cultures like America and Western Europe, in the West, most people can leave their house and go to work 5 days a week to earn enough for 7 days a week worth of food, clothing, shelter, and health care. That's unique to our time in history. That wasn't always the case anywhere at one time, and that's still not the case in much of the world today. In fact, in many, many houses, a household of people, one person can leave the household and go to work 5 days in order to bring back enough food, clothing, shelter, and health care to provide for 7 days for everybody else in the house. And even if it takes more than one, that's unheard of in time and in the parts of the world. It's unheard of because it's just inconceivable. Here's the thing. Even if you're one of the ones who work a job, the average person after work and sleep has 50 hours of leisure a week to do something with. That's inconceivable in history, and sometimes in the world today. Many people today can only imagine such luxuries as that. Now, we want to talk a little bit about being rich, but I said today we got to be grateful to be rich. The problem is we don't think we're rich, because just like thin, for so many people, is a little thinner, rich, for so many rich people, is just a little bit richer. In fact, surveys have been taken where they asked people, what does it take for you to feel, what is rich to you, or what is rich enough to you? Here's what's interesting. Surveys have shown that people, when they're asked what they think rich or rich enough would be, almost always quote, they'll follow up and ask, how much do you actually make yourself in your household? And usually people give a number that rich or rich enough is about twice as much as they make in their household. So they ask people who make $35,000 a year, what's rich enough? They often say something like $70,000, $75,000. When people were interviewed who make $50,000 a year, they said, how much is rich to you? And they said about $100,000 a year would be rich enough. People who are making $150,000 a year, they're asking them, what do you think is rich? They would say, oh, I don't know, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000. And the measurement consistently became, what do I make? what is rich? It's almost always double. It's always more than I have now. It's always a little tighter on the corset. It's a little bit more. It's a little further. In reality, we have the majority of the world's wealth in the West, but we don't feel rich because we're busy comparing ourselves to the rich. Like if I could take us in this room right now, and if I could have 100 people here, and you or I are one of those people. There are 100 people in the room, and 96 of them were poorer than you or I. 96 of them were much poorer, not just poorer, like most of them way poorer than us. And then we were one of the 4 that were well better off than the 96, but we weren't as well off as the other 3. We would feel guilty in that room context to say, life's not good or God's not good or whatever because I don't have as much as these 3. It would feel, we might think it or want it, but it would feel bad to say it because of all the people who are not only worse off, but well worse off. We know that just that's crazy talk. That we're not happy enough because there's 3 ahead of us. But that's kind of our status in the world. The problem is this. We don't see the 96%. Maybe on a commercial once in a while, or maybe on an advertisement or some special cause someone's promoting on the news or whatever. We don't see the 96. All we see is the other 3 or 4 people who are better off than us. And we think, I'm not blessed and I don't have it good because I don't have what they have. And we're unaware of how much struggle there is in the world. I was talking after church this morning to Roger and Sheila Ryder as they left. They just took a trip to Guatemala not long ago. I've been to the Philippines a couple times, and both of us been into very poor areas, not any kind of resort area, but the poor areas of countries whose poverty level doesn't even look like our poverty level in America at all. And we've seen the people who have no full roof over their head, or have no walls or houses that blend from one. You kind of walk through a space and, oh, this is a house, really? And you kind of keep walking through that space, and then what is this? Oh, this is another person's dwelling place? What is this? Is this some kind of an alley with some level of coverings, I guess, maybe? Dirt floors? We've seen poverty. It's amazing, much of the world will have cell phones, but they're not fancy cell phones, and they have limited data plans, but they have to have them in poverty-stricken areas. That's their only communication with the outside to function. I mean, they're almost more necessary there than they are here. And basic lifestyle, basic goods that we just take for granted or don't think are good enough are just unthought of to much of the world. But we don't know that because we don't see it very much, and because we don't see it, we don't feel rich, because we're comparing ourselves with other rich people. And it's a bummer to compare yourselves with rich people because they have more. It's like watching, you girls have put up with it for years. You guys looking at some kind of pornographic image or some fake girl doesn't look that way, and you're like, that is an unrealistic standard for somebody to look like that or act like that, and it's disgusting. Of course, girls, in your own way, I've been around a church for long enough to know more girls who get mad at their husbands for thinking a girl's cute, they think, she has her favorite Hollywood hunks that she openly talks about. So I understand that we're all full of it sometimes, right? But here's the deal. I can sit there and watch, what we were looking at Marvel the other day, Captain America pulling a helicopter up with one hand and holding on the bar, and his muscles are bulging, and I'm like, man, I've been lifting weights, man. I look at Michelle like, is she drooling right now? Don't look at that, I can't do that, And because when you compare yourself to unrealistic standards, right, girls, guys, it's like, I'm not good enough. I can't do that, right? But we're rich. We're just looking at the wrong people. Let me ask you some questions. Do you have rich people problems? Most of us have rich people problems. Like what, Arlen? Okay. Have you ever complained that you have bad cell phone coverage? Rich person problem. You ever sit around and say, where do we want to go on vacation? Where do we want to take our days off and travel to? I just can't decide. Rich people problem. You ever have your computer crash? Your internet's running slow? Your car having trouble? Your flight was delayed? Your Amazon package took more than 2 days to get to your house? Rich people problems. In fact, running water. We see people in cities complaining because their waters they're asked to not run water in their lawn for certain days, or During the water shortage. In our place, we have boil orders in certain areas sometimes, and we all get freaked out. There are much places, we water our grass in America. Like, there are places in the world where people walk a quarter of a mile to get to water. By the way, mostly women. The women don't do it. Women are walking a quarter of a mile every day to get a bunch of water, to bring it back to their house so they can have something in their house so their family can get by with that day's water, so they go back another quarter of a mile to get more water and bring it back again the next day. They can't imagine having so much water that you turn it on in your lawn and you just make your grass greener. It's like, what? Now, you see, Arlen, I'm feeling guilty. I hope not. That is not my goal. Listen, don't feel guilty. Be grateful. That's what we're saying. Don't feel guilty. Be grateful. Because here's the thing. Guilt doesn't move us anywhere. It doesn't do anything. Never helped any person be better very long. It might be a short-term boost. But boy, listen, grateful is another thing. Great things flow from hearts of gratefulness. So, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help us to be grateful, to be rich. And then we can warn ourselves that there are dangers to being rich. Did you know that there are dangers to being rich? For example, did you know that having wealth doesn't make you good at handling wealth? We know that, right? We all know people who have more wealth than us who don't handle it very well, and we all think the same thing. If I had their money, I'd handle it better. If I had their money, I'd have all my problems gone. If I had their money, I'd be happier than they are. If I had their money, I'd distribute it better than they do. But having wealth doesn't make you good at handling wealth. In fact, it's interesting. I'm a football fan. I'm going to watch the Colts play today, hopefully win. Tough game today. Here's the thing. 78% of NFL players are broke, nearly broke, after 2 years of retirement. NBA players, the average NBA player, 5 years after hanging up the shoes, is broke. And I know sometimes an injury happens that shortens a career, and some get paid more than others, but on a base level, they're getting paid more than we are. And even if you have a long career, many of them finish their career and end up broke. And let's not even talk about actors and actresses and singers and musicians and bands who have hit it big and got their sometimes long fame, sometimes short fame, either way made a lot of money for some period of time and are desperately broke later on. How about lottery winners? They say the average lottery winner is broke within 5 years of winning the lottery. Now, I know that wouldn't be you and me. That's just all those other crazy people. But the average one is broke 5 years of winning the lottery. I've known two people people who I've talked to years ago who won the lottery together. They went in together and they split the money. I met them at a garage sale where they're selling things trying to pay their bills several years later. Again, we look at that and say, what's wrong with them? Because we think that we would do better. But having wealth doesn't make you good at handling wealth. And it's not only handling the money, it's our generosity. We should be generous. We think the more we have, the more generous we'd be. Like today we're saying, I'd be generous if I had more money. But we get more money, you don't get more generous. You just have more money to spend, and it mostly goes to ourselves. Interesting statistic. They say that the average amount of giving from people who make $50,000 a year, they give 6% of their income away on average. Now, I know people who make a lot less than $50,000 a year who give more than 6% away. Some of us are in this room that do that. But $50,000 a year, the average is 6% in generosity. But when it jumps up to $200,000 a year, the generosity percentage, the giving percentage drops from 6% down to 4% for those making $200,000 a year. And the higher you go on income, the smaller the percentage of giving drops. And you say, well, it looks like a lot more because they're making more, but it's actually less because they're actually making so much more, they're actually keeping even more of it. And the more you get, the more we tend to hold it to ourselves and not give it to anybody else. That's just what happens. Now, here's the thing. We can point out people who are not good at being rich, but some of you know people who are good at being rich. Not just millionaires that you might know who are good at being rich. You might know some people like you and me who are average middle American rich compared to the rest of the world, who are really good at being rich. They're grateful and they're giving. And Paul, the apostle, was writing to young Timothy, and Paul, the apostle, was saying, hey, Timothy, listen, here's what you need to do. You need to tell the people in your city. See, Timothy was a young pastor pastoring in the city of Ephesus. Ephesus was a port city on the Mediterranean, and the apostle Paul knew from traveling his circuit of missionary work that people who lived on the port cities of the Mediterranean were extra wealthy. because commerce would come through ships. And you have your poor people in the city, but you had more rich people there than other places. And so Timothy was pastoring in Ephesus, and in Ephesus you had people who were poor, average, and also people who were rich in that time in the port cities like Ephesus. And Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, and he says this. He said, Timothy, teach those who are rich in this world. By the way, in this world, don't miss that now. Teach those who are rich in this world. That would be you and me also. I know. We're not always rich in our neighborhood. We might not be rich on our street. We might not be rich in our family. But we are rich in this world. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money. Isn't that interesting? It's so easy to lack humility when you have wealth. We've all seen that. Don't be proud. Don't trust in their money. Why? Because it is so unreliable. And when Paul said those words to Timothy, I can't help but wonder if Timothy or Paul would think 1,000 years earlier. 1,000 years earlier when the King Solomon, who was a wise man, wrote wisdom literature, much of it written to his children who were wealthy, about how to handle it, and also to anybody else who would read it. And 1,000 years before this, Solomon told his audience in Proverbs chapter 18, verse 11, he said, the rich think of their wealth as a strong defense. They think of their wealth as a strong defense. They imagine it, that's a good word, they imagine it to be a high wall of safety. In other words, people who are wealthy think that wealth has built a wall around them that nothing can penetrate. And yet it does. Their marriages can still go bad. Their children can still struggle with their relationships with each other. They still can have disease that even their better access to health care can't fix for them. The easy thing in life, to think that depression and sadness and discontentment can creep in. But the rich sometimes imagine their wealth is a high wall of safety protecting them. And that's why Paul said to Timothy, tell the rich people, don't trust in that. In fact, it's why later in Proverbs, another man wrote these words in a prayer in Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 8. He said, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. Why? For if I grow rich, I may deny you, Lord. I may deny you and say, who is the Lord? Riches tend to do that. You see, not everyone who's wealthy, whether it's wealthy to you or wealthy like you in America, not everyone who's wealthy falls into that trap of trusting in riches. In fact, there's a difference. There's a difference between trust and riches, where I have riches, but I also trust in God and know where it came from. There's a difference between trust and riches versus trust in riches. There's a difference. But the problem is that often, many of us, we have rich kid syndrome. We have rich kid syndrome that we're not any better at being moderately rich than our millionaire neighbors are at being uber rich. And what I'm trying to say is, and what Paul was saying to people who, of his day, we need better management skills. We need to acquire the management skills that match our level of wealth in this world. But that takes a shift in how we think. Because the key is possessing wealth without wealth possessing you. To possess wealth without it possessing you. And so Paul said to Timothy, chapter 6, verse 17, teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud. Not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable because it's so easy to trust in your wealth. Paul said instead, their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. We need to put our trust in God. Now, I hope that before we're done today, and I'm going to pause for today because we have to wrap this up and finish with our announcements in a few minutes here, with our special announcement. But here's the thing. What I hope that today and next week we can remind us is that we're rich. In this world, we are. Again, we might not only see richer people than us, so we don't see that, but we are really well off. What I hope to do is help us today to just stop and realize it and not to trust in it, but to be grateful to be rich. That's what we want is gratitude today. Every day of your life, you should thank the Lord. Say, God, thank you for the things that I take for granted. Wow, I have so much. where I was born, when I was born, where I live, what I have. Yes, there are mores. I'm a have not compared to some people, but I'm a big time have compared to so many others. Thank you, Lord. To be grateful to be rich. And then hopefully I want to come back and talk about how to be great at being rich. But for today, I want to give us a mantra. This mantra is kind of taken from these verses that we just read, slightly worded differently. I want you to take this mantra home with you. It goes like this. I will not trust in riches, but trust in him who richly provides. I'd like for someone to write that down. Maybe take a picture with your phone, or if you're online, take a screenshot. I will not trust in riches, but trust in him who richly provides. That ought to be on some of our computers on the top of our computer before we open Amazon, or before we, I don't know, wherever you frequent, like me, on my refrigerator perhaps. Well, I wish I was a little thinner. But anyhow, put it on your, I don't know, your steering wheel of your car. I will not trust in riches, but trust in him who richly provides. Take that home with you. In fact, would you say it with me? Can we all say out loud these words together? Ready? I will not trust in riches, but trust in him who richly provides. Let's do it one more time. Even if you're at home watching online and no one's there, I know you don't stand for the national anthem in your living room when the game's on. You probably just sit on your couch and eat popcorn. But I want you at home or in room, let's all say it together as we read it. Ready? I will not trust in riches, but trust in him who richly provides. That's our goal. And let's be grateful to be rich. And let's be great at being rich.